as a Jew reading the Christian scriptures, something comes up right away when you read the scriptures. It's obvious that the Jewish disciples of Jesus had one understanding of Jesus, and Paul had a different understanding of Jesus. And one of the places in their scriptures where it's the most obvious is in Acts 21. In Acts 21, it describes how Paul comes to Jerusalem. Paul comes to Jerusalem, and James, who's a brother of Jesus, and James tells him that the believers here in Jerusalem, in other words, the followers of Jesus here in Jerusalem, heard about you, that in other lands you're teaching Jews to abandon the law of Moses. And therefore, I suggest that you put all these rumors to rest by coming to the temple and bringing an offering on behalf of these Nazarites that we have over here. In other words, the Jerusalem church had several Nazarites that needed to bring offerings in the temple, and Paul was going to pay for these offerings, and that would be a demonstration that he is loyal to the law of Moses. Now let's step back a little bit. The law of Moses is very complex and it's very broad. From all the things in the law, from all the laws, all the commandments in the Torah, the only one that James could pick out was a Nazarite offering. He could have brought a regular offering, a Thanksgiving offering. He could have it didn't have to be an offering in the temple. It could have been wearing tefillin, observing Shabbos. It could have been eating matzah on Pesach. There could have been so many different things that he could have had Paul do publicly, and that would be a demonstration that he's loyal to the law. From the Christian scriptures, it's obvious that people that were loyal to the law wore tefillin. They wore phylacteries. So let Paul put on some phylacteries and walk around, and then everyone will see that he's loyal to the law. Why does he have to go to the temple and pay for the Nazarite offerings? And to me, the answer is very obvious. Because Paul was the one that thought of this new idea that Jesus is the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. And James and the following in Jerusalem, the Christians, the followers of Jesus in Jerusalem, didn't believe that. And the proof that they didn't believe that, because they themselves were participating in the temple offerings. They didn't believe that Jesus was a sacrifice to end all offerings, all sacrifices, because they were still using the temple offerings. They were using the temple offerings, and they themselves, if they needed atonement for a sin, they would go to the temple and bring a sin offering. And a Nazarite offering includes a sin offering. If you look at number 6, it's clear that a Nazarite has to bring a sin offering at the conclusion of his vow. And therefore, it's obvious that the reason James chose this particular commandment is that he didn't just want Paul to repudiate, to make a demonstration that he observes the law, but he wanted Paul to repudiate his teaching of that there is no other atonement for sin without Jesus. That's what Paul wanted. That's what James wanted, and that's what's the discussion in Acts 21. That's how I understood it. And I decided I want to research the subject. Maybe the Christian commentators on the book of Acts have a different understanding of the story. So I decided to go down to a Christian library, which is actually went down to the Philadelphia College of Bible. Their library is open to the public. And they had bookshelves full with commentators on the book of Acts. And I went in with a friend, and we piled up the books on the table, and we went through, just turned to chapter 21, see what it says on it. Most of them didn't comment on this issue. That means the two questions I was looking for an answer is, why were the members of the Jerusalem church still bringing offerings in the temple after the death of Jesus? Question number 1. Question number 2 is, why was this particular act, the act of bringing an offering in the temple, chosen as a demonstration of Paul's loyalty to the law of Moses? And I'm sitting in the library with my friend, and I told him, listen, we're looking at these books, Acts 21, if you see anyone that says anything on the subject, please show it to me. And I went through one pile of books, and he's going through another pile of books. Most of the commentators didn't say a word about either of these two questions. The few that mentioned it, their attitude was that James was dead wrong, and the Jerusalem church was dead wrong. And Paul would have been wrong had he went along with it all the way, because the end of the story was they didn't actually go along with it all the way. He was interrupted, and it didn't end up happening. That was the attitude of some of the commentators. Most of the commentators were silent on the subject. While I'm going through a pile of books, my friend, he got bored of going through the books. So he decided to wander around the library and to find a professor, to find a live person. Instead of trying to find the answer in books, try to find the answer from a live person. And after a little search, he came up with a professor who teaches in the Philadelphia College of Bible, and he introduced him to me. He said, "This is a professor, I found him over here at the library, and ask him your question." So I asked him my question. I asked him, why were members of the Jerusalem church still bringing offerings in the Jerusalem temple after the death of Jesus. And just to compound the question is, don't try to tell me that they were bringing the offerings as a symbolic remembrance to the death of Jesus, because these offerings were being processed by the temple establishment. The priests that were processing the offering were not Christians. They were not believers in Jesus. They were regular people. They're regular Jews that had no clue about Christianity. And furthermore, this act of that they're asking Paul to bring this offering is meant as a public demonstration. It's meant as a public demonstration that the audience should read it and understand it as a demonstration of what? A demonstration of Paul's loyalty to the law of Moses. And the law of Moses says that the offerings, the temple offerings, provide atonement for sin. So obviously the members of the Jerusalem church, the people that lived with Jesus, we're talking about Peter and James and all the disciples that lived with Jesus, did not believe that Jesus died for everlasting atonement. So this person didn't have a response. He thought and he said, I don't teach the book of Acts. That's not my position in this college. I teach other books. And he suggested I speak to a colleague of his that does teach the book of Acts, and I actually emailed him, and the discussion went nowhere. He tried to answer that it was meant as a symbolic, as I mentioned, it was meant as a symbolic remembrance of Jesus' all-atoning sacrifice. So I told him, first of all, it was processed by the temple establishment, and B, this was meant as a public demonstration. So he said he has no time for the discussion, which is, by the way, a very typical response that I get from missionaries.